of love,
truth, peace, freedom, and justice. Allah is my protector, my guide, and my salvation. By night, and by day, through His holy prophet, True Ali.
Ameen. Islam. The Moorish Science Temple of America, the Divine Constitution and Bylaws. Act 1. The Grand Sheikh and the Chairman of the Moorish Science Temple of America is empowered to make law and enforce laws with the assistance of the Prophet and the Grand Body of the Moorish Science Temple of America. The Assistant Grand Sheikh is to assist the Grand Sheikh in all affairs if he lives according to love, truth, peace, freedom, and justice, and it is known before the members of the Moorish Science Temple of America. Act 2. All meetings are to be open and closed promptly according to the Circle 7, and love, truth, peace, freedom, and justice. Friday is our holy day of rest because on a Friday the first man was formed in the flesh, and on a Friday the first man departed out of flesh and ascended into his Father God Allah. For that cause, Friday is the holy day for all Muslims all over the world. Act 3. Love, truth, peace, freedom, and justice must be proclaimed and practiced by all members of the Moorish Science Temple of America. No member is to put in danger or accuse falsely his brother or sister on any occasion at all that may harm his brother or sister because Allah is love. Act 4. All members must preserve these holy and divine laws, and all members must obey the laws of the government because by being a Moorish American, you are part and parcel of the government and must live the life accordingly. Act 5. This organization of the Moorish Science Temple of America is not to cause any confusion or overthrow the laws and the Constitution of the said government, but to obey hereby. Islam. Act 6. With us, all members must proclaim their nationality, and we are teaching our people their nationality and divine creed, that they may know that they are part and parcel of the said government and know that they are not Negroes, colored folks, black people, Ethiopians, because these names were given to slaves by slaveholders in 1779 until 1865 during the time of slavery. But this is a new era of time now, and all men now must proclaim their free national name to be recognized by the government in which they live and the nations of the earth. This is the reason why Allah, the great God of the universe, ordained noble Jew Ali, the prophet, to redeem his people from their sinful ways. The Moorish Americans are the descendants and the ancient Moabites who inhabited the northwestern and southwestern shores of Africa. Islam. Act 7. All members must promptly attend their meetings and become a part and parcel of all lifting acts of the Moorish Science Temple of America. Members must pay their dues and keep in line with all necessities of the Moorish Science Temple of America. Then you are entitled to the name faithful. Husband, you must support your wife and children. Wife, you must obey your husband and take care of your children and look after the duties of your household. Sons and daughters must obey father and mother and be industrious and become a part of the uplifting of fallen humanity. All Moorish Americans must keep their hearts and minds pure with love and their bodies clean with water. This divine covenant is from your holy prophet, Noble Jew Ali, through the guidance of his father, God Allah. Islam?
Islam.
Islam, Moors. Now next we can commence to the 101s, also the Quran questions for Moorish children, because we're all children in the eyes of Allah. Also known as still on Friday nights, this is going to continue the question and answer period. So if there's any questions, or if anyone wants to make any statements or build on anything pertaining to the 101s, feel free by the raising of the hand. Islam? Okay. Just blow your... Okay. Islam. So we refrain from the 101s at this time. I just bring you up, Mom. I can just bring you up. Okay. Because you're going to go into 7, right? Okay. All right. I'm going to go into the guide and get us ready for Holy Quran night. I'm just going to start with something simple more. It's Friday, September 28th, 1928. Prophet Noble Jew Ali speaks to the nation. He needs strong men and women. And I reference this because as we're going into Friday nights, meaning that we're all here for a reason, we're all looking to expound, elevate, and be vanguards of the Moorish movement. So I feel that this Friday, September 28th, 1928, goes in tune with this Friday, December 4th, 2020. Islam?
Islam.
If you have race pride and love your race, join the Moorish Science Temple of America. and become a part of this divine movement. Then you will have power to redeem your race because you will know who you are and who your forefathers were. Because where there is unity, there is strength. Together we stand, divided we fall. Come, good people, because I, the prophet sent to redeem the nations from mental slavery, which you have now, need every one of you who think that you are in a condition, your condition may be better. This is a field open to strong men and women to uplift the nation and take your place in the affairs of men. If the Europeans and other nations are helping me, why not you? It is your problem. The Negro problem is being solved only as it can, and that is by the Moorish national divine movement. If your nation, you must if you have a nation, you must have a free national name in order to be recognized by this nation as an American citizen. This is what is meant when it is said, seek ye first in the kingdom of heaven, and all these things will be added unto you, by the prophet Noble Ali. And I just wanted to go on that before we dive into the Holy Quran class more, because when the prophet said he needs strong men and women, he's talking about physically, but also mentally. And I think that's part of the reason why we're here on Friday nights is to sharpen our mental swords. Islam? Islam. Next, I'll call the Grand Sheikh of the Temple, Nature El Bay. Islam? Islam.
Rise, giving perfect praise to Allah, giving honors to our holy prophet, Prophet Noble Ali, giving honor to the sons and daughters of the Asiatic race of North America, giving honors to all our foes, our adversaries, also giving honors to the lower self. When on a foe, a soldier never knows the strength. Islam? Islam. Islam. Say happy holy day to all the Muslims, not just here, but all over the world. Islam. Islam. Couple things I want to bring forth here tonight. Last week we spoke about, and we always speak about, the Charter of the Moorish Science Temple of America, speaking about to initiate and to consecrate missionaries of the Prophet. And it speaks about to propagate the faith of Ali here in America. So we're going to draw off of that. To consecrate and to initiate missionaries. So we explained that the Moorish Science Temple of America, the Moorish Divine and National Movement of the world, has a mission. And we know that to be a earthly mission and a divine mission. And because it is a divine mission, is being narrated and navigated by Allah. So it's not any one individual's movement. It's not even Prophet Noble Ali's movement. Prophet Noble Ali, as being a true and divine prophet, and one of the true and divine prophet, is a messenger of Allah. Yes, he's an angel of Allah who was sent to bring us the everlasting gospel of Allah. But he's also referred to as a messenger of Allah. And messengers brings a message from on high, right? So when he says to consecrate is to deem or to make something sacred. So to consecrate and to initiate missionaries. So the individuals that is coming into the Moorish Divine and National Movement is being transmuted into a sacred, a religious, a divine spirit. Their spirit is being transmuted, their flesh is being transmuted from cardinal flesh to flesh divine. Not just by signing up for the movement, because the movement, again, is a spiritual and spirit dealing with atmosphere, dealing with air, dealing with ether, dealing with gas, whatever your terminology is and your concept is. But it's being transmitted into a fleshless substance, which we get more into the etheric gases that we speak about that we call spirit. So the movement, the divine and national movement, is a spiritual movement, meaning it's a fleshless movement. It's an etheric movement. So the physical beings, the flesh beings, the physical cardinal beings, can't necessarily vibrate with the Moorish divine and national movement because of what the substance of the Moorish divine national movement actually is. It's a fleshless substance. You understand what I'm saying? Anything divine, anything godly, anything spiritual can't be seen by the human eye. So you can't see the Moorish divine and national movement. You can't necessarily see the Moorish Science Temple of America. You can't go into a Moorish Science Temple of America and open the door. Why? Because it's not necessarily, the organic concept of it is not a physical building. We go back to the 101s again. It says, where's the nearest place we can meet Allah? Is in the heart. But it's not even the physical heart. It's not a human heart. So again, it's the same concept with the Moorish Science Temple of America and the Moorish Divine and National Movement. It's not necessarily a physical movement. We enter the gates from the physical reality of things. We join a physical membership and citizenship that appears to be the Moorish Science Temple of America and the Moorish Divine and National Movement. But it's sort of like color, where it appears to be that, but it's not really the case. Remember, the prophet talked in code. He said he had to go around his elbow to get to his thumb. So what is he really saying? That some things just can't be told in words. Some things are not just going to be understandable to us from the concept that we perceive it. But there's so many clues and layers of the information that he gave us to prove what I'm saying is a fact. He said, yes, we're going to be fully redeemed, fully saved, but it's going to be done in a conflict that can't be told in words. Islam? So I just want to set the tone of where we're going with this. It's a holy day for Muslims all over the world. So this is not just a Moorish Science Temple of America sacred time that we're meeting. He brought us into a program. He set us up with a ritual program that connected us with a higher etherical program. By saying Friday is the holy day. Why? Because Friday was the day in which man was formed in flesh, which deals with creation. Friday is also the day that man departed out of flesh and ascended unto his Father God Allah. So for that cause, Friday is the holy day for all Muslims all over the world. So it's a holy day. Holy deals with divine and sacred. Set apart. Absolutely. So there's a transitioning physically and metaphysically that's taking place on a Friday. that just by coming to a Friday meeting does not mean, or saying Happy Holy Day does not mean that we're on that vibration of what the lesson stipulates. But it is a start. It is a directional pivot in the direction where we need to go. It's a clue. So anything we do in unison and simultaneously and consistently creates a momentum. It creates speed, creates velocity, going in a certain direction, which gains power. So we talk about spiritual. So we speak about spiral. We speak about the way energy moves, the directional point of energy. So when we're saying spirit, it don't mean consciousness, but it means the directional movement of air. So the more physical beings that we get that's thinking the same thing, reading the same thing, and talking the same information gains momentum and will eventually create the energy vortex that's needed for us to unfold and to evolve as a people, as a nation. Now I'm talking physically on a lower level, but it does have a reality on a higher level. But right now I'm just speaking about where there's unity, there's strength. What occurs physically when we get unison on a physical level? What can occur in the physical by gathering, by uniting physical beings and getting everybody on one thought pattern? What that can physically create is what we're talking about now. And why it says Friday is the holy day for Muslims all over the world. So all over the world, which Islam is a way of life, is also a religion, but is predominantly the largest religion in the world. So you got to understand, when I say it's not a more science temple thing, is you have people vibrating on similar information all over the world, not just us. Not just us picking up the Holy Quran in the Moorish Science Temple, but you got people picking up the Holy Quran in Mecca all over the world. So you got to understand how much energy is being created. And I won't just say, well, one thought, because there is several thoughts, because there's several different fractions and denominations and lessons and languages when you deal with Islam. But remember, the Moorish Science Temple of America represents the uniting of Islam and the uniting of Asia. The Prophet said the keys is in our hands, into the hands of the Asiatics of North America. But it's really more practices of Islam being done in other parts of the world more than it is here in this portion of America. But the keys are in our hands. This is what we refer to as Northgate Civilization, the hub. So it's very important that we can't look at what they do over there and what they're dealing with over there. We have to look at what we're going to deal with here, because the rest of the world is dependent on what we do here. So the Negro, Black, and color situation we dealing with here is a part of the divine plan. Why do I say that? Meaning that we deal with cause and effect. And we say that there are no happenings, right? We say that law governs all events. So being that the Moors, the Moroccans, the Moabites, the Canaanites, etc. fell, and we were branded Negroes, blacks, and coloreds and Ethiopians, according to Acts 6, right? That was an event that took place, correct? That was a reality that took place. So it was done according to law. According to the lessons, right? Law governs all events. It didn't say it governs some events. So if the Moors was branded Negro, black, and color, those were events that occurred, and we have dates to prove it. Then it was done according to law. And then we also say that Allah, which is the great God of the universe, is the best of planners. So that means that this was all planned out. Just dealing with the psyche, dealing with cause and effect, not dealing with spookism. Just dealing with science here. The creation, chapter 1 says it, the creation and the fall of man. So this is evident. But now it calls on the interpretation of what we're talking about that determines if we're coming from a dogmatic perspective or are we dealing with science? Because this is referred to as a Moorish science temple. So that means that the teachings should be backed up and should be taught according to science. That means the members should be dealing with science and not dogma or dogmatic perception or theory, even though it's referred to as a theosophical organization. But again, that's what the media would say. Moving right along. So Allah is the best of planners. That means that by the Moors falling, losing their nationality, giving up their nationality, whatever your perception is, means that that was a part of the divine plan. It says we honored not the creed of our forefathers. We start serving carnal customs and merely ideas of man that have never done us any good. Islam. So that's cause and effect. It's also referred to as justice. This is important because when we say justice, we think that justice, and I don't want to say us as in this room, in this meeting period, but just collectively, when people say justice, they're mainly referring to what someone owes them or what someone needs to give us when we say we want justice. We seek justice. And we don't understand that our condition is based off justice. Our situation is based off justice. Our branding and our names and our slavery was based off justice. So this is why the Prophet Noble Drew Ali taught us to go within to correct the issue and not to point the finger at someone that doesn't look like us. But if we want to find our devil, he told us to do what? Look within. And what is his name?
Self.
Wow. His name is self. Man wants to find his devil. His own devil, he has to go within. But that's collectively as well. Islam? The only devil we need to be redeemed from is self. So I'm just showing us that there's nothing that exists outside of self, is what the lesson goes back to. Perception of thyself, he who created thee. What else is it that man needed to know? That means there is nothing you need to know outside of self. There's nothing nothing that exists outside of self. Islam. So when we open the front cover of the Quran up, Islam, page 3. Actually, the first page of literature according to the text. But it says, know thyself and thy Father, God, Allah. So I want to read this front page just for those who are not familiar with the Quran to give us some background and inspiration of where the book is leading us. And before I do that, I just want to finish the concept of Friday being a consecrated day, a sacred day, and really give it some more spirituality. Like Brother Nawiel said, to set apart. So Friday was a day that was set apart. It was consecrated. It was deemed sacred by Allah, not by Muhammad, not by some Muslims, not by some Moors, not by Noble Drew Ali. It's a divine day. It is a divine day that was set aside. It was part of the plan for humanity. So it's holds sacred to humanity, and technically not just for those who subscribe to the term Muslim, because everyone's Muslim according to science. But it's a humanity day, period. And some people and some religions and nations do acknowledge that sacredness of Friday just under different names, different languages, different religions call it by different names. But we have to give honor to creation. And when we really get more in unison with the thought of and the concept of holy day, like it really says that it should be our holy day of rest. Where some people that's more in tune with it might just rest on Friday and use it as their Sabbath and not work, not stress themselves out, not deal with finances and different things of that nature, worldly things, much as possible. And there are lots of people who do that. So you have to have time for self. Especially in the world that we live in, that we're constantly in a battle against good, against evil. So we have to have at least a day to set aside from worldly things, from the battle. So just give that some thought. Islam. Know thyself and thy Father God Allah. The genealogy meaning gene, of Jesus. And Jesus means justice. So again, just trying to erase the biasness out of some people who might not be familiar with where this is going. Jesus means justice. We're not caught up in the character or an individual named Jesus. Just throwing that out just so that we can get the message. Don't focus on the messenger, just deal with the message. The genealogy of Jesus within the 18 years of the events, life, works, and teachings in India, Europe, and Africa. These events occurred before he was 30 years of age. These secret lessons are for all those who love Jesus and desire to know about his life, works, and teachings. So let me stop and explain a part of this. So in the early 1900s, and actually still today, but more in the early 1900s, most of our ancestors, our foremothers, our foreparents, our grandparents, as you will, some of our great-grandparents, were forced during the time of slavery. They were forced into the Christian religion. They were forced to use names that were not of their own. We were forced to accept surnames that were plantation names or the slaveholder names that enslaved our foreparents. This we know. But the religion was one of the things that they stripped from us with our name and also our nationality, our culture, our way of life. So because Christianity was the religion of the slave master and the slaveholders, they forced that religion on the individuals that were already on this territory when they colonized this territory. So they were forced to accept the characters, the names after themselves, their forefathers, their history, and their gods. We were forced to accept their language. So with that being said, Christianity was a very popular religion during that time period, and I said it is now as well. But back then, they didn't have too much options of what they wanted to follow or what religion they wanted to practice. They didn't have that option during those times. So most of our foreparents at that time were indoctrinated very heavy into Christianity. Anyone practicing Islam, it was forbidden for them to even practice Islam and even talk Arabic. Islam. So they were forced to talk or adopt the language, which is the dialect or the language of their slave masters. So because Prophet Noble Drew Ali is a teacher, he's a scientist, not just a prophet, and he's also a professor, he understood the psyche, he understood the indoctrination and the slavery. His mission was to free us from the mental slavery and the physical slavery. So his job, his mission was to free the people from slavery, all aspects of the slavery. And in order to do that, most of the people that he will be freeing was indoctrinated through Christianity. So the Christianity had a language to it. So the Bible was the language that was introduced to the slaves. And they also had ministers and preachers that taught them the translation of what they wanted them to know out of that Bible. Now, again, you always hear me say that the Bible is one of the greatest stories ever told. So let's not get it twisted. The Bible is a freedom book. It's a salvation book. It is what it is. But most people don't know how to decode it. So it doesn't serve as a freedom book or as freedom papers because of how it was retranslated to the people. So Noble Drew Ali understood this, being a scientist and a master that he was, and a magician. So he had to decipher it. He had to decode it to the slaves in order to free them from the mental slavery that they received. So he had to introduce us lessons, writings, scriptures that was in the same language as what the slave master gave it to us in or taught it to us in. So he gave us the same language, the same lessons, but he decoded those lessons where they had a different meaning. It's no different from words, how we all go into dictionaries. We deal with etymology, right? And we can, the words that we were used to, we can say, okay, well, this is what we thought they meant. But now when we do further investigation of those same words, we realize that those words have different meanings. Correct? That was never taught to us. And that's the same type of concept of what Drew Ali did with the lessons that we were already familiar with. So because people already had that quote unquote love for Jesus, he used that fire and that zeal and taught them with the same lessons to make them look at those lessons a little bit different. That's part one of the scenario. Also, during that time, as I said, different languages in the religion of Islam was not allowed to be practiced in North America. So therefore, it wasn't easy for someone to just introduce a Arabic book or a Quran of Mecca or any other teachings that seems to be out of the common way of being taught. So he, again, when he said he had to go around his elbow to get to his thumb, it was another way of telling you that he had to decode what he was doing. And he told you to take you 50 years or better just to understand what I have brought you. So he had to also trick those that was his adversaries at the time, those that might have the ability and force to shut him down and take him out during that time. He had to kind of disguise his program, his lessons, and his teachings so that it would not be taken out too quickly. You understand what I'm saying? And even within me explaining that, I have to still be kind of code how I bring it to you. This is why it says, as man unfolds, as God unfolds. Because it's not meant for a group or a nation of people to pick it up all at one time. Because if the people can pick it up at one time, the people that he's teaching can pick it up at one time, then also the adversaries can pick it up all up at one time. So you got to understand the conflict it would cause if everyone knew the core of the mission and understood the lessons all at one time, what can occur. So again, it's a very metaphysical movement. So whenever you're dealing with a metaphysical movement, as what we're dealing with, it cannot be understood all by one or two or three different levels of understanding. It is divinely prepared that way. Islam. So with that being said, these lessons are ancient. They go back thousands of years. And they also retranslated in other languages and other texts. So the Bible is not the first translation of those texts. And this is not a Western book or Western method of teaching. This is an ancient Eastern method of teaching. It has just been retranslated into a Western society. We're learning it from the Western perspective so that we can transmit that into a Eastern science once we get to that level. But we couldn't learn it from an Eastern perspective because we wouldn't be able to relate to it because we were born in America, so to speak. Not accepting the term America, as the organic term, but just the concept of our nationality is Moorish American because we are descendants. So we're descendants of the East, but we're born in the West. You understand that concept, right? So we are organically Eastern, but we're modern day Western. So our modern day experiences exist in the West. So we comprehend through the West. The way we learn is through the Western society. So we have to adapt and learn and master the West in order to transmit or transmute or transition into the East. Islam? The West is really an illusion. The East and West might be physical, geographical realities nowadays, but it didn't start that way. Organically, the East and West is not a physical territory, it's not land. So we can go into the Eastern and Western hemispheres and reduce the physical world or reality from the East and the West. The East and the West is not just physical. The East and the West is also metaphysical. So just as we have the demarcation of land, we have the dividing of the land, we also have the dividing of hemispheres. That created a division of thought. We have an Ethiopian thought pattern, so to speak, that created in the metaphysical world before it occurred physical. It only occurred physical because it was symbolic of what happened metaphysically. So we created this all in a mental plane. It was a mental blueprint before it became a physical blueprint. So everything we're dealing with in the physical is just symbolic of what we can't see. So just like the concept of the prophet talked about the uniting of Asia, of something that has to be done physical, but it's also something that has to be done metaphysical. But we have to do it physically first. No different from the lower self and the higher self, it's the same concept. It's a division. It created a polarity. It created two. But two is always an illusion because in true organic science, there's only one. So it was one first, and then it was created in two, and that's how we learn through duality. So now you have a polarity or duality because we created that through a false pretense on a mental plane, which we created a physical reality of a duality. So we have to learn through duality. It's a reality, but it really is fictitious. It's really false. It's really color. And that's something that we have to reverse through our mental thought plane. Islam? So it says, dear readers, do not falsely use these lessons. They are for good, peace, happiness for all those who love Jesus. Dear mothers, teach these lessons to your little ones, that they may learn to love instead of hate. Dear fathers, by these lessons you can set your house in order, and your children will learn to love instead of hate. So let's deal with that science. We're exposed to so many different teachings, so many different schools of thought. And it's all good and it's all necessary. in the evolution of man. But let's deal with some of the pertinent lessons and instructions that Noble Drew Ali left us. And let's look at what the goal is when we say, man, know thyself. When we say know thyself, we're dealing with self, right? But we understand when we go further into what self is, we're dealing with, if you want to deal metaphysically, you're dealing with the sun, moon, and the stars. You want to deal physically, you're dealing with man, woman, and child, right? Which we deal with self-preservation. These are some of the lessons. So we deal with family. So let's deal with our immediate family of the household. These are our immediate lessons that we have to deal with. And these are most of the things that's out of order. I'm gonna talk simplicity, but I'm also gonna try to go higher on what the problem is that we're just not getting collectively. And as I spoke, and I'm upset that the movement appears to be masculine because it's more males that seems to be in the movement than females. And when you look at how Drew Ali taught and instructed us, he taught this to be a family thing, a family evolution from the immediate family perspective, not collectively, but immediately, meaning that mother, wife, father, and child. The lessons specifically went to them, mother and father first, but he said that you use these lessons to get your house in order and teach these to your little ones so they can learn to love instead of hate. So now what are we really dealing with? He's trying to teach man, woman, and child from the household. What does that do? What does that do collectively for society? When we go into government starts at home. Government starts at home. If we go into a prior source of government, well, we deal with tribes, we deal with villages. Everything started, the government or the society was the tribe was the immediate home base. They collectively make up the government or make up the community. Each household, and it's still that way today. We just don't really view it that way. But each household collectively represents a community. And that community collectively makes up a nation or a state. Because state is not the geographical boundaries of New York, New Jersey, etc. down the line. State just means a jural society or political body. So you can have a small community or as a borough or a county that is their own state, which is how it used to be in the organic days. Even in the early formation of this present government, the counties superseded the state. Before there was a state, there were counties, and the counties were the law. So each county was their own state or their own jural society or their own government. That's how it was prior to Confederation and Continental Congress. So what makes up the county is the community that's within that geographical boundary. And that's what we call common law days. And again, we have to understand that, because it really, once you really understand that, you'll know that certain things just can't change. Even though they might amend things and say it changed, but it doesn't, you can't change the organic common law. The Constitution never was intended to change the common law. And statutes, like we said last week, even within their statutes, they say it can't change the common law. So a true constitutionalist or a true statesman knows that the old way is still the new way. And they can't be tricked by what someone stand up and say, well, we made an amendment and now we're doing things this way. A true statesman will say, I object to that, because according to the law, that can't be done. I.e., that's how you're supposed to look at the 14th Amendment. Supposed to say, nope, that doesn't exist. That never was brought into law. I don't care what you say. It contradicts the Constitution itself. How can you amend something to the Constitution that contradicts the Constitution? So according to the Constitution, it can't be amended to it. That's the same concept with slavery. The Constitution claimed it was formed to abolish slavery, but then what it did was it accepted and bureaucratized slavery. So automatically the slavery was unconstitutional. But they said that they used the Constitution to protect their slavery, which is a contradiction. That's another story. But not to get off path here. The concept of the state is a jural society. So this is where we go into the Moorish Science Temple of America as well, being a jural society and being its own state. We will understand these things when we go back to how common law operated, how the Mosaic codes were, how the Sharia laws were, even though they might deviate a little bit because of the style of government that it was. But as a community, each household becomes a political body. Each household. And then each household comes together and makes up that community. That's the concept that I'm trying to bring here. So Prophet Noble Drew Ali understood that science as well. And again, taught man, woman, and child simultaneously, and summons the children to go to Sunday school to be taught these lessons, because out from your Sunday school comes the guidance of the nation. The lessons of this pamphlet are not for sale, but for the sake of humanity. As I am the prophet and a servant is worthy of his hire. You can receive this pamphlet at an expense. The reason these lessons have not been known is because the Muslims of India, Egypt, and Palestine had these secrets and kept them back from the outside world. I'm going to repeat this. The reason these lessons have not been known is because the Muslims, not the European slaveholders, understand this, not the Romans. He said the reason these lessons have not been known is because the Muslims of India, Egypt, and Palestine had these secrets and kept them back from the outside world. And when the time appointed by Allah, they loosened the keys and freed these secrets. And for the first time in ages, how long, what is the time duration of an age estimated? Anyone know? Saru?
So rise, give for the praise to the architect. Honor to Noble Drew Ali. Honor to everybody in attendance. Appreciate you.
Islam, honest to you.
From my understanding, cycle of the zodiac, which is, I think it's 2,166 years.
Correct. Islam, according to record, that is. Islam. So we're looking at an estimation of 2,166 years is what is referred to as an age. So again, if you go back to the lesson, it says, for the first time in ages. So that's multiple ages, which is at least double, correct? At least double. So if you double 2,166, you're going to get over 4,000 years at a minimum, according to Drew Ali's record. So he's saying that these lessons existed over 4,000 years at a minimum. And these secrets have been delivered in the hands of the Muslims in America. It's referring to as us. Yes, thank you. So there's another lesson hidden within there. For the first time in ages, and it's been released to the Muslims in America. So let's look at what occurred during that time period. Islam, thank you. We hear more say Noble Drew Ali was the first to bring Islam back to these shores. All right, so that's where we have to understand this particular lesson here, because that's what explains it. That's part of what explains it. But again, after the colonization and the last stronghold of the Moors in 1774, when our flag and our nationality, our culture, our religion was taken away from us, remember, the colonizers threatened, forced, killed, and took everything away from us that had anything to do with Islam. They were not allowed to even mention that word after we were colonized. So from that time period of the 1774, even though you might have little sidebar meetings or Islamic gatherings might have still been going on, they were in secret, they were not public. And if they were caught practicing anything that resembled Islam, then they were killed. So any practice in Islam from the Moors that still was lingering around in those days was done secretly. So after generations went on of this secretly meeting, it eventually bred out through generations, where for a long gap of time there was no practicing of Islam, Islamic meetings, or the culture being preserved here on these shores, especially from a temple perspective. There was no masjids, there was no mosques for long periods of time after the colonization of the Muslims in America. This is what this is saying here. So when Noble Drew Ali came upon the scene and set up the old Canaanite temple, this is part of his mission to reintroduce Islam back in these shores. So he did not just set up a Moorish Science temple or what we call an old Canaanite temple. What he also did was reestablish Islamic teachings and Islamic culture and Islamic names in these shores, i.e. in North America. That's very important, because any practice of Islam today, regardless of what angle it's coming from, owes its allegiance to Prophet Noble Drew Ali. The freedom of religion of our practice of our Islamic religion, we owe tribute to Noble Drew Ali for allowing it to be possible to even stand up and say Islam. He made that possible. To have an Islamic temple, regardless of what you call it, owes its allegiance to Prophet Noble Drew Ali. So even if you don't accept or endorse the concept of Prophet Noble Drew Ali, you got to give honor where honor is due. He made it possible for you even to practice your thought pattern of Islam. And that's the truth. That is the truth. And that needs to be brought more to the forefront of our acknowledgments and in history, because we're given what they call Black history, which reflects slave events. In modern day leadership of people who did things in the modern day slave era, which is important, but to neglect something as massive as a Asiatic, which you will call a Black man, came and established the first Islamic temples and Islamic and cultural Asiatic businesses of the time, him and again Marcus Messiah Garvey. Together, what they have accomplished, no other Asiatic men or women has done thus far. They have done things that have not been done by other individuals since the colonization of the Asiatic or African in America. So why don't you speak about that and educate the people about that? And we can't expect them to do that because they have an agenda. But what I'm saying is that's why we are charged and summoned to do that. That's our job. And if we don't highlight that, then history will go untold. History will go untold. This is why Prophet Noble Drew Ali came out with the Moorish Guide Press, the newspapers. He said that the truth about a minority people would never be told if it wasn't for our own press. If it wasn't for our own press, not their press. So we can't expect their press, and the press is not just their newspaper, but it could be media, journalism, internet, YouTube, or whatever. It's all an example of press. We can't expect no one else's press to tell the truth about our experience. So he initiated and consecrated us to tell the truth about our story here to the rest of the world. Again, back to the founding of this meeting, that's what the charter is for. The charter is not just for us to sit in the seat, get some information, and go get some personal asylum out the deal. It's not about personal sovereignty. That's not what this movement is about. It's about educating man, woman, and child. It's about bringing out the best in them so that they can exceed and excel and evolve. That's the core of this movement. Whatever else comes with that is just extras. But people should not look at the other things as the highlight of what comes from membership with this movement. It's not. all authority and rights in publishing of this pamphlet, 1927, by the Prophet Noble Drew Ali. The industrious acts of the Muslims of Northwest and Southwest Africa. These are the Moabites, the Hamathites, the Canaanites that were driven out of the land of Canaan by Yahshua, and received permission from the pharaohs of Egypt to settle in that portion of Egypt. So again, we're going to slow this down because there's a lot of lessons on the front page of this Quran. Before we get into the text, we have to understand what we're actually dealing with. I'm going to repeat this and I'm going to explain it. These are the Moabites, the Hamathites, the Canaanites, who were driven out of the land of Canaan. We are descendants of the ancient Canaanites, according to record, right?
Right.
And received permission from the pharaohs of Egypt to settle in that portion of Egypt. What is that telling you? Anybody have an idea what that statement is saying? All right, I'm gonna explain it. You wanna give it a shot, Mark? You got the baby. You don't have to rise.
First, I rise again, honor, give praise to the great architect of the universe, Allah, for his prophet, Noble Drew Ali, foreigner, Marcus Garvey, Grand Sheik, Sheikhs, all honorable members, and everything pertaining to Islam.
Islam.
Give me 1 second to get my thought together.
Yes. Let me repeat it, or you got it?
Repeat it one more time.
Islam. My question specifically is, what is the prophet insinuating when he says that we received permission from the pharaohs of Egypt to settle in that portion of Egypt? It says that we were driven out of the land of Canaan. All right? We were driven out of the land of Canaan by Yahshua, and received permission from the pharaohs of Egypt at that time to settle in that portion of Egypt. Is the question. What is he making reference to?
Making reference to, I believe it's in chapter 45 or 47, when it mentioned the Pharaoh giving permission to father and son to he gave permission to I'm trying to think of the correct title, but I know it's father and son.
Mm-hmm.
He gave them permission that where they can reside or domicile in here in these areas.
Mm-hmm. All right, Islam. Chapter 47, you coming from?
Correct.
Islam. All right. So hold that thought, because there's several different thoughts that's going to lead up to that. Omar, you want to give it a shot?
True. Where did they go? They went to Asia.
Mm-hmm.
Are the Moorish Americans any relation to those angels? Yes, we all have the same father and mother.
Mm-hmm.
What people represent the lowest of those who were cast out of the holy city and those who accept their teachings.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, my answer is 50. They went to Asia, meaning it was the same land, same people, different vibration. It was driven out. So what I'm saying, it was the same geographical. It was the same. Canaanites, Hamathites were all the same, but different principles. So they was driven out of the Holy Land, but in a different portion of their land.
All right.
It's like how we was driven out of Asia, out of the Holy Land, but it's all in Asia, but different concept.
Islam. And that's also related to it. So I'm going to give you another thought, because directly where I'm going, and it can go into different areas like where we're going, but I don't want us to miss a clue right here. This is very important. So remember, repeat it. I'm gonna go fast this time. Just get us back on cue. These are the Moabites, the Hammatites, the Canaanites that was driven out of the land of Canaan. So we was once in Canaan, right? That's why we refer to as the descendants of the ancient Canaanites, right? We was once in Canaan. We was driven out of the land of Canaan by Joshua, which was a Pharaoh, and we received permission from the pharaohs of Egypt to settle in that portion of the kingdom. Now you got to read further to understand what that was saying. In later years, they formed themselves kingdoms. These kingdoms are called this day, which means today. Morocco, Algiers, Tunis, Tripoli, etc. So now the key and the clue to this is once our forefathers left Canaan, which was also part of Egypt, that should correct some of the modern day history they tell you, where they try to tell you that Egypt is separate from Canaan. And at that time, it wasn't. This is where chapter 47 also clears up that misunderstanding, that Egypt was a vast, big territory of land. Where today, just like no different from New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, and Delaware, they are called different states now. But at one time, they wasn't all separate states. You understand? Where now we're talking about borders and corporate jurisdictions. That occurred sort of like back then is what it's saying here. It just wasn't bureaucratized by colonists like it is now. But listen to the story. So they moved to another portion of Egypt, is what this is telling you. So they never left Egypt. They were in Canaan and just went to another portion of Canaan and also another portion of Egypt, right? So they were still in Egypt. And they said in later years, they formed themselves kingdoms. So we know Morocco is referred to as a kingdom now. Well, the prophet said we're descendants of Moroccans. But that is not to be construed with the kingdom of Morocco. We're not descendants of the people of the kingdom of Morocco, because the kingdom also represents a corporate jurisdiction. So Moors got to be careful when they talk about the treaty and talk about Morocco as an independent country or kingdom, when the ancient Moroccans supersede the kingdom of Morocco. Our dominion and jurisdiction to rule here in this portion of Amexem or Africa is not based off the kingdom of Morocco. The kingdom of Morocco has no jurisdiction over the Moorish Americans' dominion and jurisdiction here. That is very, very, very important in our understanding dealing with law and jurisdiction. We are not subjects of the kingdom of Morocco. And if you just throw that talk around as being descendant of Moroccans or Moorish, meaning because we share the same standard, the same flag. We share the same flag, which I'm sure we all know the history of that. But because we share the same flag, it could be construed as we're subject to the jurisdiction of the kingdom of Morocco, because that is used as their national standard. And we must understand that that supersedes the kingdom of Morocco's jurisdiction and authority to rule. Let's go a step further. So it says in later years, they formed themselves kingdoms. So when the Moors or the Moroccans settled in that portion of Egypt, it wasn't referred to as a kingdom at that time. So there was no kingdom of Morocco in those days. So when our forefathers domiciled there, so to speak, it wasn't called a kingdom. There was no jural society or jurisdiction referred to as the kingdom of Morocco. That was Egypt and still a part of Canaan. So the Hammatites, the Moabites, which the Moorish is the descendants of the ancient Moabites. The Moroccans are the descendants of the ancient Moabites. Like you said, it's all the same people, just different jurisdiction. In later years, they formed themselves kingdoms, and these kingdoms are today called Morocco, Algiers, Tunis, Tripoli, etc. Those are all modern-day corporate jurisdictions. So again, that's also referred to as the Northwest, a Mexum, which we refer to as Africa today. That's the Northwest Africa. Just some of them, there are more, but just to name a few. And they have been colonized as well. They have suffered slavery as well. So again, even just like we talk about America, and I'm gonna get to you in a second now, just like we talk about America now, we talk about the Union State Society, the Union of States, the United States, the states entering the Union, and we know prior to that, the states existed, but just under different jurisdictional names. Just like we have this information in science, in history of America, that same science exists over in Africa, which we refer to, organically speaking, as a Mexum. But it's sort of like the same colonization. It was just in that time done by our own people. So again, there's history over there and history over here. The history over there is what karmatically led to us suffering the enslavement here. The colonization that took place here is based off karma. Also, if you want, you could call it karma, or I'm gonna call it justice, because there's a reason why it occurred. Now Islam, you want to get that thought out?
Yeah, I rise in the name of Allah, Most Highest of the Highest, the Father and Source of Life. Honors to a noble prophet. Honors to all members in attendance for the holy day. Honors to everything pertaining to Islam.
Islam to you.
You mentioned the Northwest being that portion of Egypt, and that Hamatite and the Moabite and the Canaanite. Some of them was driven out. So that means some was driven out and some remained.
Absolutely.
So the ones that was driven out was able to form kingdoms instead of like new dominion. Would you consider that like an expansion or something that had to be done because we was getting too like clustered in one area as far as like the multiplying of the people? I
wouldn't say that, because again, it's based off divine events that took place again. So it had to be more of a like I said, more of a karmatic reason why that occurred.
But you just mentioned justice, and we know justice is an attribute of the higher self. The higher self is human spirit, clothed with soul made in the form of Allah, the mother of the virtues, harmonies of life that breathe justice, mercy, love, and right. So if justice is that cause, that means it has to be something for a higher reason.
Well, absolutely. Remember, Allah is the best of planners. Back to what I was originally saying. Anything that occurs, I don't just dealing with science. We don't look at there is no negative and positive. So anything that occurred based off the will of Allah. But with that being said, justice just deals with equilibrium and balancement. It's just it balances an equation. So not necessarily. So absolutely, whenever justice is instituted, it's based off a higher cause. I agree with that. But justice itself doesn't necessarily mean that it has a positive view.
Okay.
Because justice is going to balance out regardless. That's evolution. It's going to justice is just balancement.
And what you just mentioned about it being a positive view, and that's what I'm trying to give it, a positive view, because some people, when they read it, it says driven out. That means you was cast out. I don't want to give it that view. So I'm saying we needed space to expand as a people, so we went into other portions of land that wasn't inhabited, so we could expand. Like the same story with Abraham and Lot. Remember, they had too much possession, so they had to go separate ways. And Lot ended up in Sodom and Gomorrah, which was in another territory, and Abraham stayed in a portion of Canaan. And the reason why they had to separate because they was expanding as far as their possession.
And being that you know the story, that needs more translation than that. Because the reason why the story needs to be known is because it's the answers to how to reverse the present day situation.
True.
All right, so absolutely, we want to always look at the positive in any equation, but we also got to acknowledge what is viewed as the other part of the story or the negative or whatever you want to call it, only because there's a lesson in there. Like the Quran tells us the accident is due to praise. Why? Not because somebody might have got hurt or something when we call evil occurred, but it only occurs as a lesson. So there's a lesson in everything that occurs, even if it appears to be bad or evil, there's a lesson in it. And once we acknowledge and learn the lesson is where the positive comes. So the positive is not just going to come just because it exists. The positive only becomes a positive when we acknowledge it and act upon it. So we have to create the positive, so to speak. That's where the justice really comes in, is we have to balance the equation. It's not going to balance itself.
True.
So it's like saying we got problems. That's like saying we got a personal problem, or we got foes or deficiencies. All right, well, they're not just going to work themselves out. Time doesn't work out the deficiencies. It's only when we acknowledge what those deficiencies are and start to address them is the only way that we can balance them out. And that's what I'm referring to as justice. So we have to invoke justice. We have to execute justice, but we execute injustice. Again, I'm taking it away from what people are commonly understand justice to be. It's not just grabbing some law books and suing somebody in court, or, it's not from what people always think it is. We have to deal with justice from within in order to deal with the outer surface of justice as well. And again, like last week, we talked about Ma'at. If we go into the Holy Quran instructions of justice, like someone to just look at justice from, again, what somebody owed to them, but you go into justice in the Quran, it doesn't talk about what somebody got to give you. It talks about what you got to give other people. So it balances what is done to us through what we do. Remember, what man does for man, he does for Allah. So by serving man, we serve Allah. So it helps us, it relieves us from the solicitudes in life by what we do for other people. That's where the term charity comes in at. Because charity is something that was introduced to humanity to give humanity a way to balance the scales, to correct the wrong that was done. So we correct the wrong that was done, or we correct the karma through charity, is why charity was given to humanity. So it's sort of like the same concept, but just different polarity. So the stories that was told, the history, I should say, history is given to us in the form of the scriptures in the Bible and etc. and other scriptures as well, to tell us a story that occurred. It gives us a synopsis of what occurred. It gives us our experiences told in a story. And our job is really to understand the story, to understand that what occurred, so we can become one with the experience, so that we can correct past history. That's the real reason it's given to us. That's the reason why, back to the beginning of this Quran lesson tonight, that's the reason why the Prophet introduced these lessons in the form of Christianity. Because there were so many lessons hidden within it that was needed for man to evolve. Not just the Moorish American here, but humanity itself. That's what makes them universal lessons. So everyone has these lessons in their own native tongue. Wherever they at in the world, they have these same lessons, but it's just translated in their own native tongue. Because it's the same lessons that's needed to evolve that society. Because we all stem from the same root. And their karma over there is the same karma over here. Islam? So the Asiatics of North America need to learn to love instead of hate. So because we suffered enslavement and colonization, it bred hatred in us. It bred a lot of hatred in us. We hate others, we hate ourselves. And that's one of the highest lessons in this pamphlet. It's easier said than done. It almost seems cliche as to tell someone to love instead of hate. We look at that like it's obvious, but it's really one of the most heaviest of all of our foes that we have. Once we conquer hate, the ball game is over. So all of the lessons that was tailored to us is in the form of helping us conquer hate or bring justice to the matter. Islam, man.
Islam, that just brought me back to flying goat demonstration constancy as a man.
Mm-hmm.
It's like who so have been an enemy cannot be a friend.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like I was just dealing with that internally because I was reading going through some chapters the other day.
Mm-hmm.
And even that is like what you said is how deep that is like to love instead of hate. Like someone that's an enemy cannot be a friend. So if I say that you're my brother, you know, it's like opening up the heart. So the Quran also says only the pure in heart can really receive.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like to really forgive. Some people say I forgive, but I don't forget.
Mm-hmm.
But then the Quran also says that there's not enough space internally to hold on to that negative vibration. That's not for verbatim, but it says you cannot hold on to those type of negative energies in order to forget. So to be this way is like you really have to like become like that version of the prophet or Jesus or that that star child on high, because again, love instead of hate, or to see someone that did wrong to you and truly forgive and act like it never happened and to move forward is those are some of the greatest concepts in life that most of us will never receive.
Islam. And that's the devil within us that has us acting and behaving according to hate. That's the demon self that needs to be dethroned, so to speak. So what did the lower self breed?
Hatred, everything that harms.
So again, so that lower self is that polarity that was created. That's where that duality came. So it says, how did the prophet begin to teach the Moorish Americans or uplift the Moorish Americans? By teaching them to be themselves. Well, how many selves are there?
Two.
There are two. Name them. Higher self and lower self. But technically, if you got two selves, that means that there's an illusion going on. There's falsehood. There's not two selves. It can't be. Not in the real world. Not on the divine plane, there's not two selves. The two selves only exist in the physical. So that's what I'm saying. We have to understand that you got art and naught. It tells you at one time they meet, and when they meet, what occurs? Then they begin to strive. And then after they begin to strive, naught goes down, and man, which is Allah, his true self, the one self, the Allah self, will abide. He will be victorious over naught, because naught is the illusion, but art is not. But they have to live simultaneously in the physical world for a while. And it says, here he tarries many ages till his lessons are all learned. Right? Here he tarries. Tarry means to stay. So that means that we're trapped in the physical for many ages until our lessons are all learned. This is why some of us study astrology, because we understand when you're dealing with cycle ages and dealing with what is called incarnation and reincarnation, then you go into birth charts to find out, try to get some history behind who you were before and what your rising and ascended is to be on where you're trying to get to. Once you get the understanding of that, then you got something to work with now. You got a blueprint to try to solve your personal situation so that you don't tarry in this physical much longer than you have to. Because that's what occurs, that we keep repeating the cycle because we didn't learn the lesson in the previous age. So it's like keep going back to prison. If we didn't learn the lesson, so we got to keep going back and serving a sentence. And this is what this physical world really is. It's more like a sentence. So I can say here we sentence many ages to our lessons to learn. This is what the Bible and all that talks about, repentance and all of this. This is what we have to do, just not from the biblical or the Christian mythology of this stuff. We have to really go within to get salvation, true salvation. Regardless of what doctrine you get it from, it has to be done. And the Quran is just the best lessons that Drew Ali thought was fit for that to be done to the Asiatics here in North America. That's why he prepared it, he tailored it, and he gave it to us. Islam? Islam.
So rising, I give all praises to Allah, Father of the universe, Father of love, truth, peace, freedom, justice. Give honors to Noble Charlie, Marcus Messiah, Grand Sheikh, Sheikhs, and to all members, anything pertaining to Islam.
Islam.
Thank you, Morris. So, I wanted to just camelback off of what you were saying right here by what he said. These are the Moabites, Hamatites, Canaanites who were driven out of the land of Canaan by Joshua and received permission from the pharaohs of Egypt to settle in a portion of Egypt. So it made me think about when the Moabites founded the holy city of Mecca.
Mm-hmm.
And it also made me think that it said settle in a portion of Egypt. So like the Grand Sheikh was saying, that they didn't leave Egypt. Mm-hmm. So now being that they settled there, they was able to, if they was driven out by Joshua, that could have been a form of justice from Joshua working through Joshua, so that our people, the Moabites at that time, would be able to settle and inhabit their own space to develop themselves. You know what I'm saying? And that would trickle down to us presently, because since that, in later years they formed themselves kingdoms, These kingdoms are called this day Morocco, Algiers, Tunis, Tripoli, etc. So, but we know that these, before it was a kingdom, it was an empire. It still is, but that's how I was looking at it. The connection for us to get it, that had to happen. So that was another form of justice, so to speak. Islam.
Islam. You know, they started traveling further west. You know, and again, that Western lesson that I spoke about is a consciousness shift. That the karmic shift creates the West, and it created the Western land, which these same Moabites, Hammatites, Hittites were the same people who traveled west through serving carnal thoughts and deeds. Drove them out of Canaan, or drove us, because we don't want to speak as third person, because it was us. But the ones, the suffering, the Negro, Black, and colored situation now, which is us, trying to correct our names, trying to fight this U.S. democracy, right?
Right.
Are those Hammatites that was driven out of the land of Canaan. So we are who our forefathers were, without a doubt and contradiction. Just keeping it real. So we was driven further west, even from that portion of Northwest, and created the Atlantic Ocean, which split, created what we call now North, South, and Central America. And now we wound up here through carnal thoughts and deeds, because we didn't correct the issues when we was driven out of Canaan. It got worse. So we created now America, which is the lowest of the low, so to speak.
The final guard.
Absolutely. We created what they call the Wild Wild West, because it's an symbolic of the lower self. So it's the place on earth that represents the lower self and other realities. But this is what the great melting pot represents. This is what it bred. So the lower self thinking bred the U.S. It bred the U.S. that we claim that we have no affiliation with. But the U.S. also was a institution that was created, but it's also a mental reality. And unfortunately, just like the lower self or Satan's self, the U.S. is bound in part to us, to the U.S., to the United States Republic. Now, this is a whole nother dimension that I'm speaking about, but it's related. That the United States of America Republic is bound by part to the U.S. And although that we denounce affiliation, we're still bound to it, and we can't really shake it because we don't really understand it yet. Just like the Satan self, we really don't understand it. So it's going to keep being a reality. It's going to keep haunting us because it's our foe. The lower self is a foe, and the U.S. is a foe. But it's a foe that we created, but it only can't get it right. Only us can solve it. Only us can solve the U.S. We say they created it, but we really created it. And we're going to be the ones that is going to resolve it. And you can translate that to Drew Ali's language. He said the same thing, just said it in a different manner. This new administration of government is what's going to do it. It's these Moors. Us Moors. As Sheikah Sneakers say, the Moors hordes increasing here in America. We're eventually will come at our true estate and govern it accordingly.
Islam.
Islam.
Oh,
I
Islam.
just wanted you to touch on.
Yes. Yes.
I'm glad you said what you said, but can you touch on that nature that spring forth from fleshy things?
Mm-hmm.
Is that the base, you would say?
Is that the debasement?
Yes, that nature. Because remember, it
Mhm.
spoke about us being fully manifest.
Yes, chapter 1.
Yeah, the final
Yes.
garb fully manifest.
Mm-hmm.
But then it says a nature, like a separate nature, like started like making its own thing now.
Mm-hmm.
And then
A manifest. A nature is just a manifest.
Yeah, like a manifest.
Mm-hmm.
But then things start springing forth from fleshy things.
Absolutely.
So would that be the same thing as what is in the question there when it said who created the devil? And it said Elohim.
Mm-hmm.
And then it said seven ether was, and then the seven ether, and then the vibrations start dropping.
Mm-hmm.
And then as that vibration dropped, it took on the final garb.
Mm-hmm.
But when it took on the final garb, they created a different nature.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yes,
and
I
that
agree.
nature is become a foe. So spirit man have to come now and go through all the ways of life to show us that we can overcome this nature.
So what do you mean spirit man has to come?
Perfected man.
All right, Islam. Islam.
Perfected man.
Mm-hmm.
So
we have to pass through all the ways of
all the
life,
way of life,
so to
yes.
speak?
Yes. I just said the seed can't germinate unless it goes in the dark.
Mm-hmm.
And for us to go through our darkest state, it says man shall reach his highest heights by going through the lowest depths.
Mm-hmm. Islam.
So Allah knew we was that perfect that, from the heart of Allah, spirit man came and he just put us in the darkness and said, do what you do.
Islam. So that's going back to created fate.
Mm-hmm.
When you talk about a nature to spring forth from fleshly things, so created fate made that possible for all things to be manifest, gave man a body that he can function. So in order for this physical world or this mundane world to exist, it had to have something to relate to. It's like life had to spring forth to make possible everything that was relative to that vibration. So this is why even down to the nourishment, the food, the plants, the animals, all of that is part of that same vibration. So it's a part of that reality where everything gets its nourishment from that reality, from that life force. And again, that's why I said in our native plane, that in the cardinal evolution, these things are not known. So again, that's the cardinal, that's the flesh, that's the nature to spring forth from the fleshly thing. But all of that must come to an end. So we have to mentally reverse the cardinal nature. So things that associate, we have to be less cardinal as possible, where we can start to less depend on the carnal nature. That's when we start to evolve. It's just like weaning yourself off of flesh, from eating flesh. Once you start weaning yourself away from it, you'll realize that you don't need it. And then now that doesn't become a reality anymore. Now you don't need it anymore. Now you look at it like, well, I accomplished that hurdle. Let me attack another hurdle that's connected to the flesh now. And we have to just address it one by one to where we have to be light as possible. We have to be dense, less as possible. And we're dealing with mentally. This is where, practices of meditation and different exercises come into play at. Well, all of these things are geared to breathing, air, atmosphere. Because man is breath made flesh. So the true Allah, the true man is breath. It's atmosphere. That's where the truest state of man is really at. Islam?
which is what we refer to as spirit also.
Islam. So we have to get back to breath. We have to find our way back to air. So we have to use the air to reverse the flesh, the carnal evolution, carnal nature. Islam. Islam, more.
Something I wanted to share.
Yes.
There's a book that I found in Goodwill yesterday. It's called American Islam: The Struggle for the Soul of a Religion by Paul M. Barrett. So it's American Islam: The Struggle for the Soul of a Religion by Paul M. Barrett. And under the chapter of Imam, which we know Imam would be like a spiritual leader, like a sheikh, right? Under Imam, it says on page 107, Islamic motives surfaced in black fraternal groups and rejected Christianity because of its association with slavery. In 1913, Timothy Drew, a North Carolinian who called himself Noble Drew Ali, founded the Moorish Temple of America in Newark, New Jersey. His seminal pamphlet, The Holy Quran of the Moorish Temple of America, drew on the actual Quran, the Bible, and the sayings of black nationalist leaders Marcus Garvey. The sect gained thousands of followers in the 1920s. Later, many members shifted their allegiance to other quasi-Islamic visionary, Elijah Muhammad.
Wow.
And then it says other
Quasi.
keeps on going on. Yeah. But I just wanted to share that with them all. That's going back to what you was talking about, how it wasn't over here and you have to give credit to Noble Drew Ali
Islam.
because of that.
Islam. So that's Islam. Thank you for being studious and discovering that. And it's more out there like that. We just have to, dig deep and look for it. Islam. And we use those materials to convince other people. Not necessarily that we need it for ourselves, but it helps in the teaching of other people. Islam.
That book is from That book is from
When was
2008.
2008.
January 2008.
Islam. Islam Moors, again, thank everybody for coming out, spending this time with our divine movement tonight, gathering with the Muslims all over the world, tapping into that kinetic energy. Islam. So we're not going to read the laws at this time, but we're going to rise and commence to the closing prayer. All those who do not wish to participate may stay seated in silent benediction. All those that do, we rise and face the east.
Hey, Morris, we got
Children, be attentive to the prayer, please.
Hey, no.
Islam, quiet, please, children. Repeat after Sheikh Isnika.
Islam.
Allah, bind our hearts and minds, as our ancient forefathers, divine creed principles. This we ask in thy holy name, in the 70th name. Amen. Islam Moors. Meeting is closed.